My name is Lydia Grant. 2 years ago, I was one of the most respected financial advisors in Boston. I had my name on the glass door of Grant Associates, an office overlooking the harbor, and clients who trusted me with millions of dollars. I spent 30 years building a reputation for precision, ethics, and calm under pressure. But it all collapsed in a single morning when the FBI walked through those glass doors. It was early October. I was reviewing quarterly reports when men in navy jackets entered the lobby. They spoke, my name showed their badges, and everything around me went silent. My employees froze. My assistant dropped her coffee. They handed me a warrant and said, "We need to speak to your son, Eric Grant." My son. My pride, my only family. Within minutes they were opening file cabinets, taking hard drives, sealing boxes with evidence tape. The sound of those seals tearing across cardboard still echoes in my mind. Eric had been forging my signature for 8 months, moving money between client accounts, promising returns that did not exist. $2. 6 million gone, clients betrayed. My reputation shredded when the news broke. Every headline carried my name. Financial advisor's son accused of fraud. I was never charged, but it did not matter. In the public eye, guilt spreads faster than truth. I was the mother who raised a criminal, the woman who lost her integrity. They suspended my license. The firm dissolved overnight. Partners avoided my calls. Old friends suddenly forgot my number. By Christmas, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of South Boston, with $40 left in my checking account. Every day I stared at the framed diploma that once hung in my office and asked myself how everything could vanish so quickly. But it was not the money that broke me. It was the silence from Eric. My son never called, never explained. I had spent decades teaching people how to avoid financial traps, and my own child had built one around me. I told myself that dignity does not need wealth. But when you are 68 and applying for jobs that pay minimum wage, that belief starts to sound naive. I kept my professional license active out of habit, as if some part of me refused to die completely. I told myself I would rebuild, somehow. I just did not know where to begin. Not yet. Charlie's Diner was the kind of place where dreams went to cool off and die. The neon sign buzzed like a tired insect, and the smell of burnt coffee hung in the air, like a warning, but it was work. And work meant survival. I wore my apron, learned to smile on cue, and poured endless cups of coffee for people who barely looked at me after years of boardrooms and tailored suits. I was taking orders from truck drivers and college kids who tipped in coins still. It paid in cash. And that was enough. One grey Thursday morning, the door swung open, and in walked a man who clearly didn't belong there. He was in his mid-50s, tall, silver-haired, wearing an Italian suit that probably cost more than the diner's monthly rent. His presence shifted the entire room. Conversations stopped forks. Paused in midair, I recognized the type instantly powerful, impatient, used to being obeyed. He took booth no. 7, spread a stack of papers across the table and started barking orders into his phone. "Sell the Florida property. No, I don't care what it costs." His voice filled the diner, sharp and dismissive. The other customers glared at him, but he didn't notice when I approached with my notepad. He didn't even look up. "Good morning," I said evenly. "Would you mind lowering your voice? People are trying to enjoy breakfast." He looked at me. Then his eyes, the pale blue of polished steel. "This call," he said slowly, "is worth more than your lifetime income." The words hit harder than he probably intended. For a second I felt that familiar sting, the one that comes when someone decides your worth with a single glance. But then I saw the papers on his table, financial reports, balance sheets, acquisition documents. My old instincts flickered alive. I set his coffee down carefully. Then, "You might want to use that income to pay your debts before you go bankrupt in 6 months. The diner went completely silent. Even the radio stopped between songs. He blinked, stunned. Then he laughed low and dismissive. "Bankrupt. I think I'll be fine, waitress." I smiled faintly. "I've seen those numbers before. They don't lie." And I walked away. Behind me I could feel his stare follow me until I disappeared behind the counter. Maybe he thought I was crazy. Maybe he thought I was bluffing, but for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt since losing everything. Control. He didn't know who I used to be, but by the next morning he would. The next morning, rain washed the streets of Boston clean. I was opening the diner at 6, the same routine as always. Turn on the lights, wipe the counter, start the coffee pot. The air still smelled of bleach and yesterday's bacon. That was when I heard it. 3 firm knocks on the glass door. Outside stood the man from booth 7, his expensive suit now damp and wrinkled, a manila folder pressed against his chest as if it contained his last hope. His hair, perfect yesterday, was a mess. He looked like someone who "D not slept. I unlocked the door halfway. We open at 7, I said. I know, he replied quietly, but I need to talk to you about what you said yesterday. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked in, dripping onto the tile floor. The diner felt different at this hour, still empty, almost intimate. I poured him coffee without asking. He sat in the same booth as before, unfolded his papers and began talking. I stayed up all night going through my books, he said, voice raw. Had my accountant recheck everything. You were right. We're over-leveraged, too dependent on short-term credit, and our cash flow is collapsing. My board has no idea how bad it is. If something doesn't change soon, we'll lose everything. I studied him carefully. You seem like a man who doesn't like hearing the word. No, he gave a tired smile. Until yesterday, I didn't think anyone would dare say it to me. He took a long sip of coffee, then leaned forward. My name is Richard Blackwell. I own Blackwell Enterprises. We're worth hundreds of millions on paper, but it's built on a house of cards. I need your help. I laughed softly. You don't even know my name. I looked you up after I left, he admitted. Lydia Grant, former senior partner at Grant Associates. You managed investment portfolios bigger than my company, than your son. While I read what happened, the words hit like cold wind. You should leave. I said, I don't do that work anymore. I'm not asking for charity, he said. I'll pay whatever your consulting rate used to be, plus equity if we pull through. I just need someone honest enough to tell me the truth. His voice cracked at the word honest. Something about that made me stop. I hadn't heard sincerity in a businessman's tone. For a long time I folded my arms. If I do this, I do it my way. Total access to your accounts, your books, your loans. No secrets. No interference. Agreed, he said instantly. And if I save your company, I added I own part of it. He nodded deal. As he extended his hand, I noticed it trembling slightly. I took it anyway. His skin was cold, but the ache was steady. He didn't hire a waitress that morning. He hired the woman he once humiliated, and maybe the only one who could save him. The next Monday, I found myself walking into the glass tower of Blackwell Enterprises, a world far removed from the grease and coffee stains of Charlie's Diner. The marble lobby gleamed under fluorescent lights, echoing the sharp click of my second-hand heels. A receptionist with perfect hair gave me a glance that said, I didn't belong. I couldn't blame her. My coat was too plain, my purse too worn, but I had something none of them did. Clarity. Richard met me by the elevator. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him, still tired but steady, ready to dive in. He asked, I've already told my assistant you'll need full access. His assistant, a young man named James, gave me a polite but doubtful smile as he handed me a stack of folders. Mr. Blackwell's financials for the last 3 years. He said it's a lot to go through. Then we shouldn't waste time, I replied, taking the folders. The conference room on the 38th floor overlooked the harbour from here. The city looked peaceful. Small boats cutting through the fog, the skyline steady against the grey morning. I spread the documents across the table and got to work. Within an hour, the pattern began to emerge. The company was drowning in high-interest loans, holding properties in Florida that were losing value faster than they could be sold. But buried in the chaos were bright spots, investments in tech startups and renewable energy firms that quietly produced steady profits. The problem wasn't the company's potential, it was pride. Richard returned around noon with 2 coffees. Well, he asked cautiously. I pointed at a chart. You've been chasing prestige projects, real estate luxury acquisitions, Flashy partnerships. They look good on headlines, but bleed money. Meanwhile, the boring investments, the ones that don't make magazine covers, are keeping you alive. He frowned. So what are you saying? I'm saying you've been run. Ning a popularity contest instead of a business. If you keep this up, you'll collapse in less than a year. Richard stared at me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. You don't sugarcoat, do you? I used to, I said, closing the folder. It never saved anyone. He nodded slowly, the hint of a smile on his lips. All right, Ms. Grant. Tell me what you need to fix it. I looked out the window at the mist curling over, the harbour, everything I said, access time, and the freedom to tell you what you don't want to hear. He extended his hand again. Then welcome back to the game, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly playing again. For the next 2 weeks, my life revolved around spreadsheets, meetings, and long nights staring at financial charts. It felt like breathing again. Painful at first, but necessary. I reorganized Richard's departments, interviewed his accounting staff, and reviewed contracts line by line. Every late night in that glass tower brought back flashes of my old life, the sound of pens clicking in board meetings, the hum of the city below, the quiet power of knowing numbers told stories that people refused to see. When I finally presented my plan, the boardroom was packed. Levta directors sat around a polished oak table, faces tight with skepticism. Richard sat at the head eyes, steady but cautious. I stood with my binder feeling every gaze on me. Blackwell Enterprises is not failing because of competition, I began. It's failing because it forgot what business it's in. You build things that look successful, instead of things that are sustainable. A few members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, Martin Webb, the board chairman, leaned back and crossed his arms. So your solution, Mrs. Grant, is to sell off half the company. My solution, I said calmly, is to sell the projects that are draining cash, pay down debt, and reinvest in the divisions that are actually profitable. You call them small ventures. I call them the future. Webb smirked. Do you even realize how reckless that sounds? And here what? 2 weeks long enough to see what your accountants missed, I replied. And if you'd like, I can walk you through the math. Richard hid a smile behind his coffee cup. The rest of the board fell silent as I outlined the strategy. Liquidate failing real estate projects, merge 2 redundant subsidiaries, and channel new funding into technology and renewable energy. It wasn't glamorous, but it would work. I ended with a simple line: pride doesn't pay bills. Numbers do. The vote was tense 1 by 1. Hands rose 5 in favour. Against 2 abstaining. The motion passed. Webb's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. After the meeting, Richard caught up with me in the hallway. That was brutal, he said. You just stared down 11 sharks and didn't flinch. I smiled faintly. You hired me to tell the truth, not to make friends. He chuckled. You might end up doing both. That night, as I packed up my notes, I realized how natural it felt to lead again. The fear that had shadowed me since the FBI raid was finally fading for the first time in years. I wasn't surviving. I was fighting and winning. It was nearly midnight when I noticed the photograph, tucked between Richard's loan files. It showed him 20 years younger, his arm around a dark-haired woman with kind eyes, 2 children sitting at their feet, a perfect family frozen in sunlight. For a moment I hesitated, then placed it gently back on the desk. That was when his voice came from the doorway. You found them, he said quietly. I turned. He looked older than ever, the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders. He walked to the window, staring at the lights across the harbour. They're gone, he continued. My wife and kids' drunk driver hit them 15 years ago. They were on their way to see me at work. I was too busy to pick them up. The words hung heavy in the air. I didn't move. There was nothing to say that could make a loss, like that smaller. I buried myself in work, he said. It was the only way to stay numb. Success was easier than grief. But lately the noise stopped helping. I nodded slowly. Sometimes work feels like a life raft until you realize it's been circling the same ocean. He smiled faintly at that, eyes glistening. You sound like someone who's lived it. I have. I admitted my son Eric. He's still out there somewhere. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. Every day I ask myself if I failed as a mother, or if he just got lost, chasing something he thought was worth more than love. We stood there in silence, the city spread beneath us like a constellation of ghosts for the first time. I saw Richard not as a client, but as a mirror, another person who had built his life on loss. He turned to me. Maybe that's why you see what others can't. You've already lost everything. That clouds judgment, maybe I said softly, or maybe it's just easier to recognize cracks when you've already broken once. We sat for another hour, going over reports and quietly finishing cold coffee. The air between us felt lighter, less like a battlefield, and more like shared understanding. When I finally stood to leave, he said, "You know, Lydia, you remind me what competence looks like when it's built on character." I paused at the door. "And you remind me that redemption isn't a theory." I said, "It's a decision." The next morning, we both returned to work with something new in our eyes. Not ambition, but purpose. The company was beginning to stabilize. Debt payments were on track, profits were returning, and for the first time in years, Richard looked like a man who believed in tomorrow. But calm never lasts long in business or in life. It was a Tuesday morning when James, Richard's assistant, burst into the conference room, pale and breathless. "Mrs. Grant," he said, "there are FBI agents in the lobby asking for you." For a split second I thought I had misheard him. The words dragged me back 2 years to flashing badges, evidence boxes, and my son's name shouted across the courtroom. "Are you sure?" I asked, quietly. James nodded. "They said it's urgent." I stood up, slowly smoothed my jacket and walked toward the elevators. My reflection in the mirrored doors looked calm, but my hands were trembling. Richard was already waiting in his office. When I arrived, 2 agents stood by the window. Dark suits, unreadable faces. One of them stepped forward. "Mrs. Grant," he said, flashing his badge. "Agent Morales. This is Agent Green. We're here regarding an ongoing investigation. You're not in trouble. We need information." Richard exhaled visibly, relaxing. I stayed silent. "It concerns your son, Eric Grant," Morales continued. "He's been cooperating with our task force on a case involving corporate espionage and financial manipulation." "My son," I whispered. "He's working with you." Morales nodded. "He's provided details about an organized effort to target and destabilize financial consulting firms. The goal was to destroy their credibility, then buy up their assets cheaply through intermediaries. We have reason to believe your former company, Grant Associates, was one of those targets." My stomach turned cold. "You mean someone set us up?" "Yes," Green said. "According to your son, a board member from a large investment corporation approached him 3 years ago, convinced him to use insider access to move funds and trigger a scandal. The man promised protection and money." Richard's eyes darkened. "Do you know who this board member is?" Agent Morales opened a folder and placed a photograph on the desk. A familiar face stared up at us, cold, smug, unmistakable. "Martin Webb," he said, "chairman of your board." "Mr. Blackwell?" The room went still. Richard's jaw clenched. "That snake's been undermining me for months," Morales nodded. "We've been building a case, but we need proof. Tomorrow's emergency board meeting, Webb called it himself. If we can get him talking, we can take him down." He looked at me. "We'd like you to attend. We'll wire you with a transmitter if he mentions the setup or your son. That's all we need." I took a slow breath. The irony wasn't lost on me 2 years ago. The FBI destroyed my life. Now they were asking me to help restore it, all right, I said. "Let's finish what he started." The next day I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the small wire beneath my blouse, and walked into the lion's den. The boardroom was full when I arrived. The air smelled of expensive cologne and tension. 11 men and women sat around the polished table, whispering among themselves. At the head sat Martin Webb, perfectly composed, wearing a tailored navy suit, and the self-satisfied smile of a man who thought the world was still his. Richard entered moments later, expression unreadable. He nodded to me before taking his seat. "Webb stood, ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly. "We're here to address the ongoing instability at Blackwell Enterprises Despite recent unconventional consulting choices, his eyes flicked toward me. The company's direction remains questionable. It's time we consider new leadership. The words were bait. I could feel the transmitter under my blouse, warm against my skin. Agent Morales' voice echoed faintly in my earpiece. Keep him talking. Richard stayed silent. Webb paced slowly around the table. Mr. Blackwell has made reckless decisions, sold assets without proper oversight, and allowed unqualified outsiders into our financial core. I rose from my chair. You mean me? He turned, pretending surprise. I don't recall giving you the floor, Mrs. Grant. Then I'll take it. I said, you're right about one thing. This company was in chaos, but it wasn't because of Richard's leadership. It was because someone on this board was sabotaging it. The room fell quiet. Webb's smile faltered. I stepped forward, meeting his gaze. 3 years ago, you orchestrated the downfall of my firm. You manipulated my son, Eric. Convinced him to commit fraud so you could buy up what was left of Grant. Associates at a discount, you use the same tactics here, create chaos, destroy trust, and take control. Webb's jaw tightened. That's absurd, Agent Morales' voice whispered in my ear. He's panicking, keep going. Absurd, I said. You met with my son at the Hyatt Hotel on Tremont Street, October 12th. You Gavi. E-him the documents yourself. The FBI has the records. His face drained of color. You don't know what you're talking about. Richard stood, voice calm but cold. I think she does. The door is open then, and a team of agents entered. The room, Martin Webb, Agent Morales announced. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, corporate espionage and racketeering. Webb's eyes darted toward me, filled with fury and disbelief, as they pulled his hands behind his back. You set me up, he hissed. No, I said quietly. You set yourself up. I just made sure the truth was heard. As the agents led him away, Richard exhaled slowly. It's over, he said. Not yet, I replied. Now we rebuild. 6 months later, Blackwell Enterprises was thriving. Richard's name was cleared, and my consulting firm Grant Strategic was back in business. The insurance settlements from Webb's crimes restored what my clients had lost. My son Eric, free at last, sent me a letter that ended with 3 simple words. I'm sorry, Mom. Sometimes revenge isn't about destruction, it's about resurrection, about proving that no matter how deep they bury you, you can always rise again. And at 70 years old, I finally did. They took my title, my company, and my pride. But they couldn't take my mind. Sometimes rock bottom is the strongest foundation, and a woman with nothing left to lose becomes unstoppable. Thank you for watching this video. Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly value every story and every voice. Don't forget to subscribe to Tears and Strength and share this video with your friends.